Hello and welcome to this edition of News on the Hour here at 10 a.m. on DD India. I'm Rukma with you, and over the next 1 hour we'll be taking a look at all the stories that are making headlines across India and the world, India's impact on the world as Prime Minister Narendra Modi attends the Quad Summit in the United States with his counterparts from Australia and Japan on the invitation of President Joe Biden in the United States. But first up, we bring you the complete coverage of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's United States visit. Let's take a look at the headlines before that. Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Washington, D.C. this morning, was greeted on arrival by Ambassador of India to the USA, Taranjeet Singh Sandhu, and US Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, T.H. Brian McKeon. Over the next 2 days, Prime Minister will be meeting leading CEOs in the United States to highlight economic opportunities in India. Is also expected to hold bilateral meetings with Australian and Japanese counterparts. USIBS chief speaks exclusively to DD India. Team DD India brings all the action from ground zero in Washington, D.C. and New York.
This is Gautam Roy.
World leaders gather in New York. I bring you the latest news and updates.
Camera person Smriti Ranjan, Arun Sharma, Doordarshan News, Washington, D.C.
Prime Minister Modi addresses global COVID-19 summit hosted by US President Joe Biden. PM stresses on pushing through TRIPS waiver at WTO for COVID vaccines, diagnostics and medicines. President Biden says Quad partnership is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses by the end of 2022. Pledges over 1.1 billion doses for the world. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar participates in G20 meeting called on Afghanistan. Says Taliban must not be allowed to use Afghan soil for terrorism. Foreign ministers of G4 countries also meet during 76th session of UNGA in New York. Jaishankar stresses to make Security Council more legitimate, effective and representative. And BJP gears up for elections in Uttar Pradesh. New election panel appointed by the party holds a series of meetings. Union Minister Dharmendra Pradhan and Anurag Thakur to hold meeting with party leaders in Lucknow today. State Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath to attend the meeting too. Over 83.39 COVID vaccine doses administered so far under nationwide vaccination drive. 31,923 new cases reported in last 24 hours, while over 32,000 patients recover. Recovery rate increases to 97.77%. And as we were telling you, we begin with the complete coverage of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's US visit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Washington, D.C. today morning. He was greeted on his arrival by Ambassador of India to the USA, Taranjeet Singh Sandhu, and US Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, T.H. Brian McKeon. Over the next 2 days, PM Modi will be meeting US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, Prime Ministers Scott Morrison and Yoshihide Suga. He will also attend the Quad meeting. and interact with leading CEOs to highlight economic opportunities in India. This is the first transatlantic visit by the Prime Minister since the COVID pandemic broke out.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down in Washington, D.C. on his first transcontinental visit and his second foreign visit since the COVID pandemic.
I'm here to see my beloved Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. We are so excited. We don't mind staying in the rain.
It is very instrumental in bringing US-India ties much more stronger.
Only he is the leader who can solve the situations in the world.
The second leg will see him in New York to attend the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. From the first bilateral meeting with President Joe Biden and leaders of the Quad countries to participation in the Quad Summit and his address to the UNGA. It's a high-power, action-packed agenda. This will be the first in-person bilateral meeting between the two leaders since President Biden took office. Previously, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had met Joe Biden, who was then the Vice President in the Obama administration, during his visit to the USA in 2014 and in 2016, when he chaired the joint session of the US Congress.
The leaders have been in regular contact in recent months. The Prime Minister has also participated in 3 major conferences and summits with President Biden as a participant. These were the Quad Leaders Summit, which was virtually held in March this year. This was also the Climate Leaders Summit, which President Biden has hosted. Both these summits were hosted by President Biden. But they also participated in the G7 summit. The Prime Minister attended virtually in Cornwall in the UK.
The last 2 decades, the relationship between the United States and India has been heading in positive and upward direction. In fact, in the first 100 days of Biden administration, we have had intensive interactions between our 2 democratic polities. This is despite all the pressures of COVID and the limitations that have been placed by it. So at least 3 times both the leaders spoke to each other. There were 2 summits, one on climate and one the first Quad virtual summit, in which Prime Minister Modi had a prominent place, and he addressed and expressed his presence there.
On September 23, Prime Minister will also meet Prime Minister Morrison of Australia and Prime Minister Suga of Japan to take stock of the strong bilateral relations with their respective countries and continue useful exchanges on regional and global issues. On the same day, Prime Minister will also hold a meeting with select CEOs of global companies. The US-India bilateral trade in goods and services reached $149 billion in 2019.
The corporate sector is keenly observing this visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi as to how India and US can come forward and can create a better trade and investment regime, because all eyes will be on the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and of course US President Joe Biden as to how can a better investment regime or the trade regime can be created so that India's Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiative can also get a major push.
Arun Sharma's report, DD India.
During Prime Minister Modi's interactions with leading CEOs, according to sources, he will be meeting the CEOs of Qualcomm, Adobe, First Solar, General Atomics and Blackstone in Washington. The list represents companies from the field of technology, renewable energy, software, drone and investment funds. The PM will meet Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon, Qualcomm is the world's leading wireless technology innovator and is credited with inventing breakthrough technologies that transformed how the world connects, computes and communicates. Its portfolio includes products for processors, modems, platforms, RF systems and connectivity, plus products based on the end-use application. The Prime Minister will also meet Shantanu Narayan, Chairman, President and Chief Executive Officer of Adobe. Adobe is a multinational computer software corporation which pioneered the paper-to-digital transformation with the invention of PDF. PM Modi will also hold talks with First Solar CEO Mark Widmer. First Solar has developed, financed, engineered, constructed and currently operates many of the world's largest grid-connected PV power plants. First Solar is a pioneer in the field of solar panel production and also has expertise in production of utility-scale PV power plants and related services. It has a 15-year track record of manufacturing, developing, financing, engineering, constructing and operating the world's leading sources of sustainable solar energy. Prime Minister will meet General Atomics CEO Vivek Lal as well. General Atomics is a defense and diversified technologies company. GA Aeronautical Systems produces a series of unmanned aircraft and provides electro-optical, radar, signals, intelligence and automated airborne surveillance systems. GA's Electromagnetic Systems division produces electromagnetic aircraft launch and recovery systems for the US Navy, satellite surveillance, electromagnetic railgun, high-power laser, hypervelocity projectile and power conversion systems. He will also meet Blackstone CEO Stephen Schwarzman. Blackstone is an investment management firm, one of the world's leading investment firms with assets under management of $684 billion as of the 30th of June this year. Schwarzman has been involved in all phases of Blackstone's development since its founding in 1985. The firm has established leading investing businesses across asset classes, including private equity, where it is a global leader in traditional buyout, growth equity, special situations and secondary investing. Real estate, where it is currently the largest owner of property in the world. Hedge fund solutions, where it is the world's largest discretionary hedge fund investor, and credit, where it is a global leader and major provider of credit for small, middle market and other companies. Ahead of the PM's interaction with CEOs, US-India Business Council President Nisha Biswal spoke exclusively to DD India. She said that India can be a driver for global economic recovery and in boosting trade and commerce. She also highlighted that despite the COVID pandemic, India has sustained record FDI investments.
Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the US this time around, building up a lot of anticipation, especially among the business world. People looking towards both the economies to ensure that the world progresses forward from this pandemic era into one of rapid growth. And Nisha Biswal is with us, USIBS chief, to tell us how exactly will that happen. Nisha, just tell us in terms of the kind of priorities that the two leaders have shown. President Biden, it's just been a little over 100 days of his presidency, and Prime Minister Modi, of course, going back to 2014. And this relationship, how do you feel it will progress through the next few years? Because we're still in that phase when we're trying to fight this battle against coronavirus.
Well, look, I think what we have shown is that the United States and India are integral to all of the big global challenges that we're seeking to address today, whether it's battling this pandemic and ensuring that India's enormous capacity to produce vaccines and life-saving medical technology is maximized in the fight against the coronavirus. And I think we will see, you know, in the battle on combating climate change and on really ensuring that our global institutions are up to the task of the 21st century. That the U.S. and India relationship is going to be very important.
Especially with the Quad, the activities that have been repeated, the Quad has been elevated and more and more economic activities will open. You'll have fresh baskets available to expand. Do you feel that that is something, again, that will give a lot of boost to business on both sides?
Absolutely. Look, I think the Quad has shown itself to be a very important and consequential platform, focused not just on strategic issues, but frankly on, how we can usher in the technologies and usher in the opportunities for the nations of the Indo-Pacific. Our four democracies are working together to ensure that we can have the collaboration in areas such as education, such as clean technology and financing, and in the tools and technologies that will help us to combat climate change. We're also looking at kind of the future economy and how we can collaborate on 5G, how we can collaborate on secure supply chains, and other ways of ensuring that we continue to see an Indo-Pacific that is free and open and that continues to be the source of innovation and progress and opportunity for the world.
And finally, in terms of how this entire bilateral relationship is moving forward, it's vision that really matters as well. And you have two leaders with great vision, especially for the progress of their countries. And when you're talking about resilience, there has to be this intent as well. And do you see that coming through in the leadership on both sides? And you have Vice President Harris also in the mix now.
Look, I think that there is enormous vision in both countries and in both leaders, both governments. And what I think we need to do is make sure that we are focused on execution of that vision. The devil is in the details. And so as we look to deepen our strategic and economic partnership, there needs to be a focus on trade. There needs to be a focus on aligning the policies and the regulatory environment so that we can see the execution of the ambitious vision that both leaders have put forward.
India has been doing that on its end. We've seen Prime Minister Modi come out with the PLI scheme. The retrospective tax has been done away with. Those are some of the two major steps that will make a difference.
Absolutely. Those are very important steps, and I think that we're starting to see more and more of an openness in India on a trade relationship and a trade agreement with the United States, and we want to see the United States reciprocate on that. We have to prioritize these things, and I think that's where both leaders can make enormous progress.
2014, you were part of the administration. The goal was $500 billion. We're at $150 billion right now. Do you think that's still a realistic goal? It's just the pandemic that got in the way, and perhaps a little bit of make America great again.
It is absolutely a realistic goal. We will get there. The question is, will we get there in 2 decades? Will we get there in a decade? Will we get there in 5 years? I think it's possible within 5 years if both countries make that a priority and do the requisite steps to really deepen the trade partnership between our two countries.
So we get to know that on the 24th. Thank you so much for joining us right here on DD News. So you heard it from Disha Biswal, $500 billion, the trade goal that was there, that had been set back in 2014. We're at 150 right now. The pandemic got in the way, but we're still on course and it can happen in the next 5 years. This is Gautam Roy in Washington, D.C. for DD India.
And Gautam Roy, our correspondent, who's covering all these events, giving us all the updates about the Prime Minister's US visit, joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Well, firstly, Gautam, tell us about the Prime Minister's engagements on day 1 of his 4-day US visit.
Well, quite a lot. It's going to be a power-packed day as soon as it dawns, because the PM is starting his day early around 9:40 with those presentations from the Fortune 500 company CEOs and top honchos, and they cover a very wide range from Qualcomm, which is a maker of semiconductors and chips and a major competitor of Huawei, to Blackstone, which is an investment firm which has tens of thousands of crores of rupees to invest and are looking to make a good profit on the investment of its contributors, and India is then a very good destination for that particular end.
Right. And when we talk about the special connect with the Indian diaspora, do you see it being taken forward during the Prime Minister's visit this time around?
Well, certainly that is the kind of appreciation and the kind of joy that the Prime Minister really brings to the Indian diaspora in particular in almost all parts of the world where Indians have migrated and settled down. And the US, of course, has one of the largest, if not the largest, Indian diaspora community, 4.2 million strong, and getting stronger by the day. So many students keep coming in as well, and at the same time you have very good immigration numbers. We have a very large quota in terms of the immigrants who want to come and settle down in the US after having worked here for years, and that is a very long queue, and that is also an issue that Prime Minister Modi might be taking up with President Biden.
Right, in Gautam, the high-level delegation traveling with the Prime Minister, it talks volumes about how the kind of focus that India gives to issues related to security and strategy. Take us through what we can understand, what are the implications of the delegation and India's focus that we can derive from it.
Yes, certainly. Foreign Secretary is also with the delegation that the Prime Minister is leading, and it just speaks to the kind of issues that could be addressed as part of this bilateral meeting that Prime Minister Modi will have with President Joe Biden. The first with Joe Biden as the President of USA, not to mention that there is a bilateral scheduled with Kamala Harris as well, the Vice President of the US, where the Prime Minister said that he would like to take up a range of issues including science and tech. And if you just speak about the kind of cooperation that India has ongoing with the US in purely science and tech, it extends across GPS data and satellites, and NASA and ISRO working together to pure sciences research as well, which has got a lot of applications in varied fields, from the internet to quantum electronics and as well as semiconductors.
Well, many thanks, Gautam, for joining us there with those details. You keep your eyes on that story. And meanwhile, let's talk about how Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India has always seen humanity as one family and is ready to work with the world to end the pandemic. Delivering his remarks at the Global COVID Summit virtually hosted by the US President, Prime Minister Modi also said that there is a need to focus on addressing the pandemic's economic effects. While US President Joe Biden has said the United States will buy 500 million more COVID-19 vaccine doses to donate to other countries.
Art can bring joy, it can also be poignant and reflective, and that's what we see out here in Washington DC, right before the Washington Memorial. This is an art piece which has been dedicated to all the victims of COVID in the United States. The artist here believes that a lot of people, their lives will have been saved had the US followed a different model of tackling COVID-19. But now, of course, there's no time to rule the losses. One still has to look to the future, which is why President Joe Biden is organizing a global vaccine summit.
India stands ready to work with the world to end the pandemic.
The COVID-19 pandemic is not over yet. Much of the world is still to be vaccinated. Prime Minister Narendra Modi made it clear that India stands to work with the world to end the pandemic. Delivering his remarks at the Global COVID-19 Summit hosted by US President Joe Biden, the Prime Minister said that India has always seen humanity as one family. Earlier this year, India shared its vaccine production with 95 other countries and with UN peacekeepers. The Prime Minister said that as production increases, India will be able to resume vaccine supply to others as well.
As newer Indian vaccines get developed, we are also ramping up production capacity of existing vaccines. As our production increases, we will be able to resume vaccine supply to others too. For this, the supply chains of raw materials must be kept open. With our Quad partners, We are leveraging India's manufacturing strength to produce vaccines for the Indo-Pacific region.
Prime Minister said that India is now running the world's largest vaccination campaign. Recently, India vaccinated about 25 million people on a single day. India's grassroots level healthcare system has delivered over 800 million vaccine doses so far. Over 200 Indians are now fully vaccinated.
Our grassroots level healthcare system had delivered over 800 million vaccine doses so far. Over 200 million Indians are now fully vaccinated. This has been enabled through the use of our innovative digital platform called CoWIN.
The Prime Minister said that there is also a need to focus on addressing the pandemic economic effects. To that end, international travel should be made easier through mutual recognition of vaccination certificates.
India and the South Africa have proposed a TRIPS waiver at the WTO for COVID vaccines, diagnostic and medicines. This will enable rapid scaling up of the fight against the pandemic. We also need to focus on addressing the pandemic economic effects. To that end, international travel should be made easier through mutual recognition of vaccine certificates.
While the US on its part promised to buy 500 million more COVID-19 vaccine doses to donate to other countries, the additional vaccines will bring US donations to the rest of the world to more than 1.1 billion doses. Joe Biden said that the US is working to scale up vaccine manufacturing in other countries. Quad partnership is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses in India to boost the global supply by end of 2022.
Now we're working quickly to scale up vaccine manufacturing in other countries around the world. Our Quad partnership with India, Japan, and Australia is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses in India.
The virtual global COVID-19 summit was convened by US President Joe Biden on the margins of the UN General Assembly. The 4-hour virtual summit was attended by leaders from Canada, Indonesia, South Africa, and Britain, as well as the World Health Organization chief.
The WHO and the UN have to really take the lead in ensuring that everything is well coordinated, the money coming in, the vaccines being produced in good numbers, in which India can hugely contribute. It has the capacities to do that, and India has said that it will reopen export of vaccines, even donations. With camera person Smriti Ranjan, this is Gautam Roy in Washington DC for DD India.
And Prime Minister Narendra Modi will participate in the first in-person Quad Leaders Summit along with President Biden and Prime Minister of Japan and Prime Minister of Australia. The summit provides an opportunity to take stock of the outcomes of the virtual summit in March this year. Here's a report.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will participate in the first in-person Quad Leaders Summit along with President Biden, Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia and Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga of Japan. The summit provides an opportunity to take stock of the outcomes of the virtual summit in March this year and identify priorities for future engagements based on a shared vision for the Indo-Pacific region.
The 3 working groups have been continuously working. So despite it not being visible to everyone, the intensive interactions between the 4 countries has been taking place, and there is a lot of movement ahead on the vaccines front. Soon enough the production of vaccines is beginning in India, and these will be for export purposes, as was indicated in that is the next year. Also on emerging technologies as well as on climate change.
This historic Quad Summit marks the coming of age of what began as an informal grouping of 4 powerful nations.
Since the time of its inception, there's been a lot of developments, particularly Afghanistan, and where China fits into that whole scenario. China has literally stepped into the vacuum left by the US in Afghanistan. So I guess India will have a lot of questions about that. I don't see the same level of interest from Japan or Afghanistan, Japan or Australia about it. Their orientation is more the Indo-Pacific region. So there's going to be a lot of they're going to have to reconcile a lot of elements here.
On education, which has both an innovation dimension to it as well as a peoples to peoples dimension. So I think those are the issue areas that you're likely to see the Quad focus on, and what you'll hear about, along with kind of a broader sense from the leaders that they are committed to this idea of working with each other.
In his address at the 76th UN General Assembly debate, President Joe Biden has announced the elevation of the partnership to take on emerging global and regional challenges.
We elevated the Quad partnership among Australia, India, Japan, and the United States to take on challenges ranging from health security to climate to emerging technologies. We're engaging with regional institutions from ASEAN to the African Union to the Organization of American States to focus on people's urgent needs for better health and better economic outcomes.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will conclude his visit with an address at the United Nations General Assembly focusing on the pressing global challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the need to combat terrorism, climate change and other important issues.
Also, multilateral reforms of the UN in particular and the UN Security Council as well. Remember, India is among the handful of countries, including Germany, Japan and Brazil, who are actually pushing for UNSC reform as quickly as possible. So these are some of the issues that the PM can be expected to raise in his address here at the UNGA come Saturday, 25th September. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran with my camera person Saurabh Shukla in New York for DD India.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will address the United Nations General Assembly debate on the 25th of September. Our correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran joins us from New York to talk about what all we can expect in the same. A very good morning to you, Ramesh. Well, of course, it's morning here in India. When we talk about the discussions in the UNGA so far, from India's perspective, what are the major highlights you would say that have major issues that have come up for discussion so far?
Good morning, Rukma. Just to give us viewers a sense of what to expect from Prime Minister Modi's address to the UNGA here in New York on the 25th of September, that's Saturday, he can be expected to focus on a number of issues of multilateral significance, not only to India, but to the world at large. Now, as the Prime Minister himself spoke at the virtual COVID-19 summit hosted by Joe Biden yesterday, Prime Minister can be expected to focus on the COVID-19 pandemic, on vaccines. Remember, India has decided to begin or resume exporting or sharing or supplying vaccines to the needy countries around the world. And also the global reboot, the global economic recovery from the pandemic will be another big issue for the Prime Minister in his address. And also multilateral reform. Now, this is a recurring theme for India at the UN body. Why? Because India not only wants UN reform in general, but also reform of the UN Security Council in particular. And yesterday here in New York, Foreign Minister Jaishankar held a meeting with all the G4 countries to once again push for a consensus on the need for adding new members to the UN Security Council to make it more diverse and representative of the realities of the 21st century. So these are the issues that the PM can be expected to focus in his address. But other than that, he can also be focusing on other important issues such as development partnership, climate change, and trying to keep the Earth's temperature by reducing greenhouse gas emissions as well. So all in all, it's an important summit for India and the world. And this is his second visit to the UNG in the last 2 years, the first since 2019. And he can be expected to focus on these issues when he addresses the UNGA. He's the first speaker on the list of speakers on the 25th. So these are the issues that he can be expected to raise in his address to the UNGA on Saturday.
Also, India's role in the COVID pandemic, the way India has reached out to less fortunate countries, India reaching out as as the pharmacy of the world, that could be a major highlight of the discussions. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Remember, Rukma, before the second wave of the pandemic, India and the Quad countries, that includes the US, Japan and Australia, had agreed on a Quad vaccine for the countries in the wider Indo-Pacific region. Now, that target was of supplying or sharing 1 billion vaccines by the end of 2022. But then the second wave of the pandemic hit, and India said, we won't be able to supply those needed vaccines just yet because we need more raw materials to make that many vaccines. So we saw a slump on that count. But recently, New Delhi has said that it will resume supplies of vaccines to all those countries in the region and beyond. So one can expect Prime Minister's focus on his government's Vaccine Maitri initiative, by way of which India has given vaccines to many countries in the Latin American countries, Caribbean nations, Africa and Asia as well. So clearly the focus will be on India's, as you mentioned, role as the pharmacy of the world. India's got production capacity, the raw materials and the wherewithal not only produce to scale up production, but also distribute it among the needy countries in the region and beyond.
And also when we talk about climate change, the way India has worked towards and achieved almost all of the sustainable development goals, the climate change targets that have been set way ahead of time, the targets ahead as stated in the Paris Agreement, that also gives us, shows us India's standing to the world in that regard.
Absolutely, without doubt. This would interest our viewers around the world. India is among those few countries who have actually on target to achieve their voluntary commitments insofar as the Paris Climate Accord is concerned, Rukma. Now, in 2015, as you mentioned, the UNGA held a Sustainable Development Summit, which was attended by Prime Minister Modi. That was the year when the post-15 development agenda was agreed upon by all the members of the UN General Assembly, and 17 SDGs, 17 Sustainable Development Goals were agreed upon in 2015 for the post-2015 development agenda. And Prime Minister Modi can be expected to focus on one key initiative on that regard, and that is Indian government's decision to not only organize an international solar alliance, but also to focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions within the national commitments outlined by Prime Minister over the last several years. So this is an important agenda item. Besides COVID pandemic, climate change is one big issue on the agenda of all the world leaders, including Prime Minister Modi here at the UNGA.
Well, Ramesh, we'll have to leave it at that. Many thanks for joining us and for those detailed inputs. We'll be back with you throughout the day and throughout the next 3 days. For sure. Many thanks for joining in. And now moving on with more updates from the Prime Minister's visit to the United States, talking about the UN General Assembly sessions now. Other updates from that, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged humanity not to treat the planet as an indestructible toy and warned of irreversible damage from climate change. Speaking at the UN General Assembly in his call on climate, Boris Johnson said the world is approaching a critical turning point and countries must finally take responsibility for the destruction we are inflicting on the planet and ourselves. Boris Johnson has cast UN climate talks in Glasgow in November as a last chance for humanity.
We're approaching that critical turning point in less than 2 months, in just over 40 days, when we must show that we are capable of learning and maturing and finally taking responsibility for the destruction we are inflicting not just upon our planet, but upon ourselves. It's time for humanity to grow up. It's time for us to listen to the warnings of the scientists.
backing the goal of the developed world phasing out coal by 2030, Boris Johnson voiced the hope that all countries would emulate Britain's goals to cut carbon emissions by 68% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels.
We need all countries, every single one of you, to step up and commit to very substantial reductions by 2030. And I'm absolutely convinced, I passionately believe that we can do it by making commitments in 4 areas. And I want you to remember them: coal, cars, cash and trees. Coal, cars, cash and trees.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met his counterparts from Japan and South Korea on Wednesday on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Blinken said that he had a productive discussion with the Foreign Minister of South Korea and added that the US-ROK alliance is a global partnership and that both the US and South Korea are promoting peace, security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. On his meeting with the Japanese Foreign Minister, the US Secretary of State said that he had excellent conversations with the Japanese Foreign Minister at the UN General Assembly. He further added that the United States and Japan are working together to promote peace, security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and across the globe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has promised a strong response after one of his top aides survived an apparent assassination attempt. Hours after a top aide to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was ambushed and attacked outside Kiev, President Zelensky addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York on Wednesday. The Ukrainian president, while giving details of the incident, said 12 shots were fired, while 3 of those hit the driver. He raised the issue saying this is the price of change in the country and the price of reform. The president called for an international response to Russia's annexation of Donbas, Crimea. He also invited all those nations to join the Crimea Platform Declaration to condemn the occupation and to demonstrate that they are against changing borders by force in the world. Indonesia's leader laid out the priorities as the world's 4th largest country prepares to assume the presidency of the G20 next year. In a pre-recorded statement at the UN General Assembly on Wednesday, Indonesian President Joko Widodo said inclusiveness and a sustainable green economy top the list. The 2022 presidency will carry the theme Recover Together, Recover Stronger. While climate change and the economy made up a substantial portion of the president's speech, he also highlighted issues of terrorism, conflict and war, and reiterated calls for Myanmar's military to ascend to an ASEAN consensus. The Indonesian president also has pledged to leave no one behind, saying that inclusiveness will be the main priority during Indonesia's presidency. And as world leaders prepare to resume talks with Tehran to reinstate a 2015 nuclear pact, Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz has said his kingdom supports international efforts aiming at preventing Iran from having nuclear weapons. In a pre-recorded video address at the United Nations General Assembly on Wednesday, the Saudi king said Iran is a neighboring country and he hopes that initial talks with Iran will lead to concrete results to build confidence based on the respect of the sovereignty and non-interference in internal affairs. His remarks followed a call by Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi to resume nuclear talks with world powers that would lead to the removal of US sanctions. And time now to take a look at our regular update on COVID-19 figures from around the world. The case tally has crossed the 23 crore mark worldwide, with over 23 crore 8 lakh cases of COVID Recoveries stand at over 20 crore 75 lakh globally. Over 47 lakh 32,000 lives have been lost. With this, the United States continues to be the worst hit, with over 4 crore 34 lakh cases reported and over 6,99,000 people having lost their lives. The number of fatalities in the US has surpassed the death toll of the 1918 edition of the Spanish flu. And New Zealand's largest city, Auckland, moved to level 3 lockdown restrictions on Wednesday and plans to remain there for 2 weeks. Cafes and restaurants have reopened for takeaway services, and construction workers have returned to building sites. Long queues were also seen outside fast food chains. New Zealand has been among the most successful in the world in controlling the spread of COVID, but it's done so by using some of the strictest lockdown measures globally and by shutting its borders to the rest of the world. The government has now said that vaccinations will replace lockdowns as the main tool against the virus, adding that lockdowns were used in the initial battle against the pandemic because there were no vaccines. New Zealand eliminated COVID-19 last year and had been largely virus-free, barring a small number of cases in February until an outbreak of the Delta variant erupted in August, prompting Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to order a nationwide lockdown. With the United States being the worst hit country by the pandemic in the world, the US Food and Drug Administration on Wednesday authorized a booster dose of the Pfizer and BioNTech COVID-19 vaccines for those aged 65 and older and some high-risk Americans, paving the way for a quick rollout of the shots. President Biden announced in August the government's intention to roll out booster shots for those above 16 and older this week. Pending approval by the FDA and CDC, advisors to the FDA voted on Friday to recommend COVID-19 vaccine booster shots for those Americans 65 and older and those at high risk of severe illness after overwhelmingly rejecting a call for broader approval. The advisory panel has said there was not enough evidence to support booster shots for all those aged 16 and older who had received a second dose at least 6 months earlier, and also sought more safety data. Some countries, including Israel and Britain, have already rolled out COVID-19 booster campaigns. The United States has authorized extra shots for people with compromised immune systems last month, and over 2 million people had already received a third shot, CDC data showed. France's ambassador to the US, Philippe Etienne, will return to Washington next week. This was announced after US President Joe Biden spoke to his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, on Wednesday. In a tweet, President Biden said that he reaffirmed the importance of French and European engagements in the Indo-Pacific while talking to Macron. He's added that he looks forward to a process of in-depth consultations and to meeting with him in October. This was the first call between the two leaders after a falling out over the September 15th announcement of a trilateral security partnership, AUKUS, between Australia, the UK and the US, which led France to recall its envoys to the US and Australia. The AUKUS pact was worked out behind closed doors and came as a surprise to other nations, enraging Macron. The French said the establishment of AUKUS had significantly disrupted their plans in the Indo-Pacific and also had come at a hefty price tag. And time now for a short break. More up ahead here on News on the Hour. Stay tuned and keep watching DD India.
With the world's largest COVID vaccination drive, India is leading the way. As the vaccine reaches every corner of the nation, do not forget the mantra, Dawai bhi, Kadai bhi. Let's continue our fight against COVID-19. Vaccination along with social distancing, sanitization and masks.
Mask up, India!
Put your mask on and cover your nose and be safe.
Mask up, India.
Welcome back. And back home in Uttar Pradesh, BJP is holding a round of meetings to brainstorm on its election strategy. State BJP in charge Narendra Pradhan and co-in charge Anurag Thakur is in Lucknow to hold meetings with state leaders. An exhibition based on the life of Prime Minister Narendra Modi was inaugurated at the BJP headquarters in Lucknow this morning. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, along with Union Minister Dharmendra Pradhan and Union Minister Anurag Thakur, were present at the inauguration ceremony. On the occasion, Dharmendra Pradhan said that the exhibition will inspire the youth to work continuously.
की प्रत्येक जिला तक प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी की इस व्यक्तित्व, इस कार्यकाल, समर्पण की और सेवा की विभिन्न उपायों में दिखाई जा रही है। एक स्पेल में निरंतर राज्य की मुख्यमंत्री और देश की प्रधानमंत्री के रूप में देश की सेवा करना, समर्पित भाव से सेवा करना, और एक ही उद्देश्य है, जन कल्याण, सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास और अभी तो सबका प्रयास है देश को बड़ा बनाने के लिए। जो समर्पित जीवन रहा, उसी प्रदर्शनी हमारे देश में नौजवानों को, देश की नई पीढ़ी को एक प्रेरणा देगी।
And in celebration of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, we at DD India present every day a saga of our freedom struggle. In today's episode, we pay tribute to revolutionary freedom fighter Rao Tularam, one of the greatest leaders of the First War of Indian Independence of 1857. Take a look.
Rao Tularam was born on 9th December 1825 in Rampura suburb of Rewari to Puran Singh and Gyan Kaur, and ruled Rewari for 18 years from 1839 to 1857. In 1857, after the rebellion in Meerut and other places, he rose up to support the uprising.
He also helped rebel forces fighting in Delhi with soldiers and resources. He also temporarily succeeded in driving out the British from the southwest Haryana during the rebellion.
On 17th May 1857, Rao Tularam, along with his cousin Rao Gopal Dev and a group of his followers, deposed the local Tehsildar. He raised a force of about 5,000 soldiers and set up a workshop in the fort of Rampura for manufacturing the guns and other ammunition.
Rao helped Emperor Bahadur Shah and other rebel forces who were waging war against the British in Delhi and sent 45,000 rupees along with large quantities of necessary commodities to him. But this help could not protect Delhi, which fell to the British on 20th September 1857.
Soon after, Brigadier General Showers led a column from Delhi to attack and destroy Rao and his followers in Rewari. Showers sent a messenger to Tularam telling him that if he surrenders along with his guns and arms, he would be treated on merits. But Tularam turned down the proposal.
British officer then sent a strong column under Colonel Gerard on November 10, 1857, which occupied the abandoned fort of Rampura. On November 16, Colonel Gerard marched to Narnaul, where the rebel forces led by Rao Tularam's cousin, Rao Krishan Singh, fought against them.
Tularam's forces fought bravely against the British. As the first charge of rebel forces scattered the British, Colonel Gerard was mortally wounded in the attack. Several other British officers were also killed or injured.
But the British forces successfully retaliated with full force and heavy bombardment. The Battle of Narnaul was one of the most decisive battles of 1857.
After suffering loss and destruction in the Battle of Narnaul, Rao Tularam moved into Rajasthan and joined the forces of Tantia Tope. But the forces of Tantia Tope were also defeated by British in the Battle of Sikar in Rajasthan. Thereafter, Rao left India to seek help from the Shah of Iran, Dost Muhammad Khan, the ruler of Emirate of Afghanistan, and Alexander II, the Emperor of Russia, against the British colonial empire.
For his defiance, Rao Tularam's estates were confiscated by the British. On 23rd September 1863, he died in Kabul in Afghanistan at the age of 38 due to an infection that spread throughout his body. Till his last breath, Rao attempted to forge alliances to fight against British imperialism.
A two-day Shahidi Mela is held annually in September at Rampura suburb of Rewari city to commemorate the death anniversary of Tularam. The Government of India issued a postage stamp on 23rd September 2001 featuring Rao Tularam. India is forever indebted to the selfless service and sacrifice of martyrs like Rao Tularam.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of News on the Hour. News and updates continue on DD India. So do keep watching. Namaskar.